The first woodcuts from like the 17th century were just black and white. Well, part of it was because there was a lot of peace. The shogunate wars had stopped, and the Tokugawa dynasty was there was a lot of stability, so that was a good thing, right? Well, and there you can see like a black and white uh, early woodcut by Moronobu, who was also an early practitioner. But the downside of that is that you had all these incredible samurai who had great skills and were antsy, and nothing. Are you all not hearing me? Or I think someone has their mic. If someone could, thank you. But they needed to be kept busy. So that's when you had the pleasure quarters develop in Edo, especially in Asakusa, which has a very important temple, Sensoji, that we take students to visit that area. So that's where the samurai hung out, and that's the beginnings of the whole geisha culture. So you can see Utamaro, his representations of the geisha. And San Antonio Museum of Art has some lovely examples of these kinds of courtesan prints. And there's always something a bit, they're beautiful, but they're also meant to be somewhat sad too. Okay, and you can see actors with kabuki theater, and that's something we often do in Japan, is take students to kabuki theater. So, and being cross-eyed, like this character, that was an aesthetic kind of approach with kabuki theater. And in kabuki theater, like that's actually a man dressed as a woman. Women weren't allowed to act. Now there is a kabuki theater outside Osaka that it's all women, and the women play the roles of men. So next time I go to Japan, I'd love to see that. This is another gorgeous print by Hokusai, and my students in 2016, we were so, oh my gosh, so fortunate that we saw all these Hokusai and Hiroshige, original, like the third print, fourth print in the edition. So it's just phenomenal to see these in life. And a little bit about those of you that are in the business world. So it's been commented on how the gorgeous blues that you see in these prints. Well, one of the reasons that Hokusai and Hiroshige used so much indigo blue was because one of their main patrons was a merchant who was at that time a millionaire from selling indigo dye. So he really liked to collect these prints that had that same kind of color as his business. But I love this abstract passage that Hokusai put into the print. And Hokusai would match the grain of the wood beautifully to the landforms. So Hiroshige is another one of the great landscape artists. So you had these printers depicting courtesans, but you also had landscapes, of course, be very important. And Hiroshige was so great at showing rain. You see the rain slanting down? And those of you not familiar with printmaking, just keep in mind what I showed you with my woodcut, that every color is a separate plate. And those plates have to be lined up exactly. So the skill to do this is just terrific. And this print of the plum blossoms is very important in Hiroshige's oeuvre. And notice these blends, and I'll show you an actual woodcut in a bit that uses those. Now, this is Kuniyoshi, and if I have some folks in this session who are into manga and anime, the roots of those contemporary art forms began with ukiyo-e. If you look at the line work, if you think of Osamu Tezuka and his use of line work in his illustrations for Astro Boy and his Buddha series, I think it's Tekuza, excuse me, but it's very similar, okay? And Kuniyoshi had fantastical types of images. This is 108 heroes of the water margin for every man. So my students saw at the Ota Museum a marvelous show of Kuniyoshi's work. It was villains, and both male and female villains throughout the history of Japan. And it was so great because the night before we had been to a kabuki performance about a murder. And sure enough, there were all these prints that were stories that were part of that story. So they were excited to see that. But he has fantastical creatures too in his prints, like this giant carp. And if any of you saw that animation Kubo, the skeleton in that, let's see, I thought that was here, was in, I think it's further on in the book, was in there. You know, and he did some very strange things like this with people's figures, creating portraits. And there's a whole genre of manga that is about horror. So there you can see early horror in Japanese woodcuts. So there's many themes throughout these woodcuts. This is another view of Fujisan, and Hokusai did 36 views of Fujisan, and he did this in his 70s. He published these, and that was the culmination of his career. His most famous work he did when he was a senior. And I think this is wonderful, the abstraction of the clouds and the lovely blend with the grain of the wood in Fujisan. So this is Sensoji Temple, and showing seasonal changes like the snow. We take students here. We always go here. This is in Asakusa. Probably the most famous of the Buddhist temples in Tokyo. But it's not snowing when we're there. We're there in the summer, and students love to stand underneath this gigantic photographs. The moon is very important within Japanese woodcuts. In fact, there's moon watching parties. I think the moon's beautiful in San Antonio. I've always wanted to have a moon watching party in my backyard. Flowers are very, and they don't necessarily signify the feminine. In fact, irises are considered masculine. And in this one, you can see just a little bit of the grain of the wood. The woodcut artists are using often fruit tree woods like cherry and pear, and those are very hard and they don't have a grain. But sometimes they'll use other things like Shina plywood that does have some grain. So views of the city. In fact, this bridge is reconstructed at the Edo Museum in Tokyo. Kabuki theater. Sumo wrestling. And look at the line quality on these sumo wrestlers. So to get these lines, they used a knife, and you'll see in my video how a knife is used. You have to cut on each side of the line in order for that to print. So with relief work, what is raised prints, what is cut away does not print. So all of this was cut away, just leaving those lines. That takes a lot of precision, and you have to be very careful. So you can see some fashions of the day. Food, I think this is sweet. The mom is holding up some sushi with her little one right there. You get a glimpse of housing, beautiful women. You know, that's a common theme. And these prints were so prevalent that when Admiral Perry opened Japan back up and European tourists started to pour into the country, and they would buy like ceramics and whatnot and to take back to Europe, they would actually use these prints as wrapping paper. So they brought these items to Europe, to Paris, and then they threw the prints in the trash. Well, Van Gogh was a dumpster diver, and he found them, and he and people like Mary Cassatt were really inspired by these prints, and it very much affected their art. Handsome men are also displayed, mainly kabuki actors, and of course we have the samurai, who feature prominently also in kabuki. And here you have people in love, and you know, there is a whole genre of erotic prints associated with that area. Children, you can see images of children. That's kind of their little guys getting a haircut. Cats are a big part of the ukiyo-e tradition, and this print by Hiroshige is one of the most important. The cat looking out onto the rice fields. And I saw this at the Edo Museum. There's playing cards with cats in all different poses. So those of you that are cat lovers, I think you'd appreciate those images. And other animals too. Here's a whale. And delicate images of flowers with insects. And then you have humorous scenes like these fish that are rowing, and then these dancing octopuses. You know, one's got a parasol. Ghost stories are an important part of the oral traditions in Japan. They have really strange and fascinating ghost stories. I think Miyazaki's animations, like Spirited Away, definitely look to these prints as inspiration. And there's that skeleton I mentioned, Kuniyoshi's. That was in the movie Kubo. They had that character. Okay, there's humor too. You know, you got this. We saw a male geisha. There are male geishas. There's only 2 left in Japan, and we saw one perform in Tokyo, and they're stand-up comedians. He was really funny too, but he would do antics like this. Okay, so I'm gonna this is a very interesting, I want to show you this print because it's very curious. This is Kunisada, and it's showing a print shop. When we go to the, there's a museum in Tokyo, the Edo Museum, that has an actual print shop that students can view. It's a life-size print shop. But women weren't allowed to do any of this, so Only men could do the printing, but it wasn't a one-person job. I mean, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ladies in this print who are doing all kinds of things. They're preparing pigments, which were traditionally made from minerals and botanical materials. Black, red, blue, yellow are the 3 basic colors. Here you can see a printing stand, and it slopes down slightly away from the printer to make it easier to apply one's weight to the baren, which we'll see is the tool you use in order to make an impression. Over here, this woman is applying sizing to the paper to prevent excessive absorption and blurring of pigments. That is super important. You can't just use any paper with these techniques, or you'll be sorry when you start to print. Drying paper to which sizing has been applied. So the art of paper making is super important in Japan. It was invented in China, and then it reached very high levels, of course, there, but also in Korea, and then made its way to Japan. And our students really love to go into the paper shops in Tokyo and Kyoto. They're just amazing places with wonderful books, handmade books and papers that you can buy. Here, a carver is chipping away areas, and she's using a mallet with a chisel, and you'll see me do that when I'm carving. So here's planks of mountain cherry. It's a hardwood with a fine, even grain. It also has the advantage of little expansion and contraction when exposed to dry or moist environments. And over here, a carver is using a knife to carve the key block. But you know, I would never be working with a knife so lackadaisically. You can see she's kind of, hey, you know, hanging with the other lady. Like, you don't want to be distracted when you're working with those knives. They're very sharp. And then over here, this lady, she's sharpening a knife, and you'll see me do that, sharpen a knife. Okay. So this right here is washi. Washi is the paper that is used for making woodcuts in Japan, and it's thick and strong. It's just amazing. It's so thin but so strong, and it needs to be, because you're rubbing the back of that paper a lot when you're printing. Okay, so that's just a traditional view of a print shop. And let's see if let me check on my video, and I'm going to show you a few supplies that I use for printing, because my video is going to go by pretty quickly because I sped it up. And let's see, how's it doing? Okay, great. It's loaded. Okay. Let me open that up. So when I get to that point, I'll share my screen and you can watch me make a woodcut. But I'll go ahead. We're doing good time-wise, so I'm going to go ahead and show you physically some of the supplies before I show the video. And while I'm doing this, actually speaking to you, if you have questions, then please ask me questions. So when you saw let's look at the paper first, so you can see different papers, and then I'm going to show you how a brush that would be used to put on the sizing. So you hear the term rice paper, but it's not really rice paper. It's the bark of the mulberry tree, and there's different types of fibers. This is kozo, so it's a very delicate paper, and it's beautiful, but it can be challenging to tear you know, as you can see, I had a little accident there, tearing it. With this kind of paper, you have to moisten it to tear it. But it's, you know, it has some really interesting properties. In fact, let's see. I'll see if I can, during the video, I'll dig that up and show it to you later. I have some paper made from sliced turnips. The Japanese are making really curious papers out of all kinds of vegetables. This is hosho, which is a nice paper, but this is not good for what we are doing. It has no sizing in it, and it just falls apart when you try to rub the back of it. So this paper is a kozo-based paper, and this is what what I end up printing with. And this is a really good paper that's thin, but it's very strong. And these are not milled hot. They're not hot press papers. They're cold press. They've been not exposed to acids and high heat like copy paper that you would use in your printer. So when I this like tissue thin paper is the kind of paper that one would use to transfer your drawing. So when you see me transfer the drawing onto the plate, this is the kind of paper. Gampi is a good one for that. Okay, so let's look at the brush that I mentioned for attaching sizing. You can see brushes that come in a wide range, and these are also used for calligraphy practices. But a brush like this is what one would use to apply the sizing onto the paper. That's called a hake brush, and they come in different sizes. In fact, it was humorous in Kyoto. This one shop had a brush that was 10 feet tall. It went all the way to the ceiling. It was huge. Okay, so now I'm going to show you different materials that I use for the actual printing. So this is birch, Baltic birch. So in the States and in Europe, this is a good option. In Finland I use this, but it's a hard wood. It does have some grain, but this is good for carving. You'll see part of my video. It shows me using Baltic birch, but the print I actually pull from Sheena plywood. And unfortunately, they don't make these anymore. They make Sheena plywood, but they don't make them so that you can carve both sides, which I don't know why they stopped doing that, because it sure is convenient. And you can get these supplies. Maybe Alicia could look that up online. McLain's, McClains, woodcut supplies. And we can put that in the chat, McLain's, or I can do it while we watch the video. But that's where in America you can get plywood for doing these processes, okay? And in the film, you're going to see that you're going to see my registration marks, okay? So typically with a print, an ukiyo-e print or Japanese woodcut, you have two registration areas. And registration, you're not signing up for classes. It's registering within printmaking means that you're lining up all your plates. Okay, so you have a registration mark here, and then you have a registration mark here. And then my paper, you'll see my paper just will fit here and here. And I carved those out, and I used a knife with a straight edge. Okay, but like I have 4 different plates that I'm working with. for this print. Okay, so that's one of the basics of printmaking is you make a matrix so that you can do an addition, print more than one. Okay, so let's look at our carving tools, and this is a sample plate that I have that shows different effects with the gouges and chisels that one uses to carve with. So I have a variety that I use. These are Japanese, okay, and they're very fine Japanese tools. I paid quite a lot for these at a Southern Graphics conference. So you can't buy these in an art supply store. You can't get them at Woodcraft. Woodcraft is another place that is local. It's off of 281 at Bidders. Woodcraft. It's a national company, but they have supplies for wood carvers in San Antonio. But they also have tools. I got the Baltic birch there, and I'll show you some tools I got there. So these gouges, I have, you can think of the letters. This is a U gouge, and this is a V gouge. So the chisel actually the tip looks like those letters there. You see the V? Okay. And this is another U gouge here, there. So it makes the shape of the U at the end. So I like to use those, but sometimes even those can be fragile. I broke that one, so I had to go buy another one because I wanted to find V gouge. So this is an American made one, so it looks a little different. You know, you don't have the wood all the way through. These are chisels that are you can get at Woodcraft, and this is flex cut. And what's neat about these is that they, like their name says, they flex, which is easier on your wrist. So this is a nice little beginner's palm set of gouges and chisels. And you'll see in the video that you can also buy a slip strop to polish your chisels, because you constantly have to sharpen those knives. Okay. And let's see. Where's that print? So the other major thing that you need some way after you make, like if you had paper on, you had this inked up, and then you were going to put paper on top to print it, you need a way to apply pressure. So you can, in the West, if you're not using a press, you can use a wooden spoon. That's the most economical way to do it, but it's a lot of work. This is a Western Baron made by Speedball. Okay, so you hold it and then you move it like so. But they're trying to copy the Eastern Baron that was invented in China, and then developed even more in Japan. So traditionally, they're made with bamboo sheaths and leather, and you can see some like that at the art supply stores. But these are the best. These are from Japan, and they have a wire mesh, and you can see that the mesh is of different. Like the layout is different for each. So this is a tighter mesh, this is a wider mesh. So, you can use, depending on if you're printing detail images or if you're printing flat areas, you change out your Baron. And this has acetate that can be rotated out, and it just buttons on, okay? So these are really good tools. When you're carving, it's safest if you have what's called a bench hook, and you can get metal ones that aren't as bulky. I made my own here, but it's just a piece of wood that has it has a piece of like 1x4 here, and then one here on the other end on the opposite side, and then it hooks on. And then I can take like a like what you put under a rug cushion, a non-skid, and you place your plate here, and then you can carve it more safely. Okay. All right, so that's just a few things that are important to this process. Here's the paints that I'm using. You'll see, and there's some of them mixed. I got these in Tokyo. So it's basically thick watercolor, and you have to add sticking paste to it. This is Yamamoto sticking paste, and you want this, do not get nori. Nori's not good. Yamamoto is better, okay? So McLean's will have that. And instead of brayers, we use brushes. And these brushes are made from horsehair. And this is what you use to get the paint onto the woodcut. All right, so I want to make sure I don't run out of time, and I am going to share my screen now so that you can watch my video. Okay.
Oops. Is everybody seeing Japanese woodcuts?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So what you're looking at right now are my gouges and chisels, and I like the flex cut. I also have some Japanese ones. Some make a V-shape line, some make a U-shape line, and I also can use a mallet to get large areas out. So I'm polishing. I'm putting a polishing compound that's called a slip strop, and I'm running the gouges and the chisels along the slip strop. It's very important to keep your carving tools as sharp as possible. So those on the left side are the Japanese ones, and here I'm showing a piece of wood that's been cut. I painted it with ink so you can see my lines. Those are the Japanese gouges. And there's the print that comes from it. Notice that it reverses. So you have to think about that in getting your design. Laying out some glue with a glue stick. Traditionally, rice paste was used. So this is birch wood. Sheena plywood or birch is common, or fruit trees like we already read about. Here's my drawing, and I'm reversing it. It's on a thin, very thin piece of paper that's see-through. I just made sure that I drew really hard with a lot of pressure so that I could see through it. And it's important that I get it really flat onto the wood. This also could be, you could use acetate, clear acetate. Some printers in this technique use that with like a 3M spray, but I don't care for those sprays. Okay, so I'm lifting it up so I can get more glue down. don't want to have wrinkles. Again, this is Baltic birch that I'm working on. It's a 1/4 inch. And this plate's 12 by 12. Still trying to get it flat as possible. Okay, that's good. Okay, I'm carving my kento, which are the registration marks. Registration marks are essential in order to get all your plates lined up accurately. So it's 2 marks. One is like triangular shape, and you line up the corner of the paper, and the other's a straight line on the bottom. And I'm using a knife first to cut the straight lines with a ruler, and now I'm gonna chisel out with a little Japanese hammer and a chisel and U-gouge. So I'm chiseling out that wood, and that really saves time when you got to remove a lot of wood. And I also have what's called a bench hook that is a special. You can get them wood or metal, but it hooks on to a table. And then I notice I have the yellow like cushion under it that's like keeps rugs from moving, but it works really well underneath these wood plates. Okay, so I'm just chiseling away, creating that registration mark. And the paper just gets chipped away. So eventually you have no paper left. And this is my key, what's called my key image. It's the last plate that I would print, usually black. And all the other plates then will be registered to this one. Okay, so I'm making that second registration mark. Again, those are called kento. So important to use a ruler. For the registration marks. And notice I'm wearing gloves. That just helps protect my knuckles and can deflect the blade if I accidentally almost cut myself. So now I'm just using that knife, and you hold it in a fist with one hand, and then you use your fingers against the blade to guide it on the bottom. 2 fingers. So you wanna make knife cuts before you start to gouge out areas, so that you can get precise detail. And these organic forms, they could be flowers, some people have told me they look like fireworks. I'm open to the interpretation. I wasn't looking at anything when I made them. It's just more kind of imagery that's repeated in my art. Okay, so now I'm using this mallet to chisel out larger areas of wood. So now I'm carved the plate, and this is actually a different plate than what I was showing you on the birch. This is Sheena plywood, which is softer than birch. And I'm using brushes to apply the ink, rather, and it's the ink is watercolor that is mixed with that green tube is rice paste. And you can apply the rice paste directly onto the plate with the pigment, or you can mix it together. The brushes are made from horsehair, So you don't use a brayer like you would in Western style printing. You use a brush. And if I've carved it deep enough, then when I put the paper on top, I won't get offset from the negative space surrounding the areas that I want to print. So I'm lining up some paper on top. And there you saw the Japanese paints, the Japanese paste, sticky paste that I'm using. And you have to keep you've got to keep that plate wet. I found that to be very important in the printing process. So here I'm rolling up, well, not rolling, but I'm brushing on ink again. And you want to pull a proof of your key plate, the last plate you're going to print, because I notice also how I'm holding it. I hold the paper between my index finger and my middle finger, and then my thumb is free to register it to the corners. So this is called a baron. Traditionally, they're made of bamboo with like leaf sheaths, but this one has a metal mesh with then like this board that creates a disc. You're starting to see the ink come through the paper. This is washi, and there's my proof. So those look good. And I'm looking at my proof. I need to do a little carving out. So that's something you also do with a proof, is you want to check where there's like areas of wood in the negative space that you don't want to print, because this is all about a raised process. Whatever is raised prints, whatever's recessed doesn't print. Okay, here I've got some other plates that I'm printing, different colors, yellow, red, that I've already carved out. So I'm painting the ink on and wetting the plate. And now I'm trying to get an even coating of ink onto the plate. Moving circular motions. You can kind of look at the surface of the plate, how it glistens, to figure out if you have enough ink on. And when I'm printing, the ink is really permeating the washi, the fibers of the paper. That's really important. You can see the ink come right through to the back of the paper. This particular baron, it has acetate protecting the steel mesh. And the steel mesh can come in different patterns, and it depends on if you're printing very detailed areas or big flat areas, which type of baron you use. These are from Japan, these barons. And they're the best. Okay, so you can really start to see the color coming through the washi. And I'll tear those borders off later. And I can lift up the paper and just take a sneak peek and see if the ink is transferring properly. Okay, here's a third plate. So this is gold. I'm adding gold ink. You see a lot of gold and silver used in Japanese art. And some printmakers can even incorporate mica powder into their inks, and it gives the prints a beautiful shimmer. I'm using paper cups for the ink. Traditionally, you'd use like a porcelain bowl. You should never touch the paper with your fingers. That's a big no-no. Only with the Baron should you ever touch the paper. Except when I'm pulling it off, of course. This paper is just so thin, but so strong. It's really tough stuff. And with this particular plates, and these are no longer made, unfortunately, I can carve both sides. McLean's is an American seller of Japanese woodcut materials. It's MCCLAINS if you're interested in getting these supplies. So now I'm doing my key image. You always call the darkest last plate the key, or it's usually black. Traditionally in Japanese woodcut, that would be the case. So understand, I'm a contemporary artist adapting these traditional techniques to my own way of working. I'm by no means a master of this. I'm fascinated by it, and I want to continue to use these techniques in my art. But it takes many, many years of study to perfect this. And here you can see I'm doing a rainbow blend of the ink. So it's very pretty, those blends. I was troubleshooting because I had some of the ink, black ink in my negative space. So this is a little artistic license here, trying to cover up a place I don't like. And I wanted to show you what a plate looks like with a variety of colors.
All right, so that is the end of my presentation. And let me get myself right side up and get my headset back going again. Although I think you all can hear me okay. Might help if I turn them on. So any questions for me?
So I was just curious, what are the benefits of using different papers? You said that they use fruit trees in Japan. What are those benefits of using different kinds of materials?
Well, the two different plates I showed you, the Baltic birch is much harder versus the Sheena plywood. If you're doing fine lines like those sumo wrestlers that I showed, you want a hard wood. That would not work with that plywood, that Sheena plywood. But the plywood has a nice grain and it's much easier to carve. So each wood has its own personality. I mean, that's something for me about woodcut versus linoleum, is that woodcut was once alive. It was, and I feel like I'm collaborating with the tree when I make a woodcut, because the grain becomes, or any marks that were in the wood become part of my expression.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. How, when you were talking about that brush, how
The 10-foot.
the 10-foot brush, can you describe that more, Sabra?
Sure, Alba. So I'm holding it up. This is, it's a horsehair brush, and if that upsets some of you, I'm sorry. Horses are on the menu in the south of Japan. I haven't dined on that. I'm pretty much a vegetarian, but you can see that this is a 60 millimeter brush, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And this one is a 75 millimeter brush. So like, I just had 2 of these. Thank you, John Lee at Trinity. He loaned me these. But I was using the smaller one for black ink, and then the larger one I was using for all my different colors. But you know, I haven't, even in the stores in Japan, I couldn't find these. I mean, you know, those sites that I listed and Alicia listed, you got to special order these. You can't walk into, you certainly can't walk into an American store and just find these. And those Barons, you have to, I don't know if McLean has those. You have to get those from Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And you can you can trim it and shape the brush. So your master printers in Japan, they'll do that as well with these. But they work. I mean, it's basically a giant brush, a giant flat brush.
How do you handle it?
Okay, so the giant brush you were referring to. Go ahead, ask the question.
How do you handle a brush like that?
Well, you move in a circular motion. When you first put the paper, well, I mean, not the paper, I'm talking about the Baron. I distribute the, here, let me hold up a plate. When I'm, here, I'll move this down.
We can just hear you.
So when I have the ink on here, I'm moving in a circular motion.
Oh, okay.
And distributing it. I mean, you don't have to spread it like you would an etching plate. You can just dab it on, and I've even seen master printers, they squeeze that paste right onto the plate with the pigment. But the key is to keep this thing damp, and also your paper has to be damp, just like with etching.
Yeah.
The paper is pre-dampened, and if that paper is not dampened, it's not going to work. So you need a strong paper that has sizing that can handle being dampened. Okay. And really, you know, by the time I take one piece of paper that I've rubbed 4 different times vigorously, it's got to be a strong paper or it'll start to fall apart.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Your presentation and your video was quite informative. Really appreciate it.
I'm glad, Alba, and thank you so much for taking time.
Well, I also have students in drawing class that are attending. So.
Oh, wonderful! Yes, yeah. I have students in as well from here and other places.
So it looks like the last question that we have time for is from Matthew and Naya. What is sizing? Maybe he's talking about the brush, or
sizing is like a starchy-like substance added to paper so that the paper won't shrink when you dampen it. because if the paper shrinks, you can have problems with registration. So a lot of Asian papers do not have sizing, but for printmaking purposes, the ladies that I showed in that print, they were applying the sizing to the surface of the paper. Your cotton rag papers like Reeves BFK, Arches, typical papers for Western printmakers to use has sizing in it. And then we do something called colandering the paper, where we actually run it back and forth through the press if you're using a press before you start to print with it, to try to, in a sense, stabilize it.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
everybody attending, and Professor Booth. I just want to say that I appreciate your knowledge and passion for Japanese art. So I'm not skilled in art, so being able to see this, it's fascinating. And it also, of course, makes me want to travel to Japan even more now.
Me too. I miss it. I miss it so. But Kawabe Sensei is up next with my colleague that I travel with, and she teaches Japanese at SAC, and she's going to teach us about origami. So you can continue with her very shortly at 1:30.
Yes, so just to conclude the session, I just want to announce the participant winner. So Matthew Anaya, you have won our little box of international goodies. So I'll be going and emailing you soon, and I'll be getting your mailing address, and we'll coordinate that together. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and I hope to see you at the other sessions for International Education Week.
So I'll say, see you later. Ja mata.
Ja, mata.
And thank you to my students who are here.